Okay, so this is going to be part 2 for chapter 5. Now we're going to be talking about the rise of the Greek city-states. As we need to really start off doing, we need to really make sure we talk about the geography first. And there's really two things that we need to look at with regard to Greece's geography. The first thing is, of course, the fact that most of it is completely surrounded by water. Okay, you've got water, the Aegean Sea, the Mediterranean, the Ionian, also known as you got the Sea of Crete. All right. You've got water all over the place. Secondly, you've got this mountainous. If you look at this physical map, you can see the fact that there are ridges and mountains, very rugged, broken up terrain. So both of these things are going to lead to definitely a diffused settlement pattern. We need to be aware of that. It is on something called the Balkan Peninsula, and these mountains are going to create valleys that look like the one that I've got pictured here. Okay, which is going to lead to, instead of having like a big giant unified empire easily, they're going to be instead set apart into independent city-states, which is going to eventually lead to a lot of rivalry and wars between the city-states. The seas did serve as the vital link that brought everybody together, but it also encouraged them, like the Minoans and the Mycenaeans before them. The Greeks are going to be very skilled sailors. They don't have enough arable farmland to grow all the grain that they need, so instead what they're going to be doing is taking the items they have available for trade that they do grow, and then, again, they're highly labor specialized. Remember, let's talk about the labor specialization. They don't necessarily produce the food, but they can use their trade items like olive oil, wine, and marble, and then trade them for grain and metal and other things they need. They're also going to adapt an alphabet. This time they're going to add vowels. Remember, the Phoenician alphabet was phonetic but didn't have vowels. The Greek alphabet's going to add those vowels to it. All right, we're going to talk about some of the early governments. The early governments are going to be very, very small populations. Okay, the city-states are going to be very, very small, and as a result, there's going to be a lot of individual personal responsibility. The city-states are going to actually evolve into 3 different forms of government. They're going to start off as monarchy. We're talking about Athens here. We're talking about his monarchy, change to an aristocracy, switch to an oligarchy. It's going to take about 250 years for that transformation. Monarchy, remember your roots, mono ruled by one. Aristocracy is actually going to be ruled by the wealthy, specifically the landowners, and then an oligarchy is going to be ruled by the few, and that's going to be specifically the business class folks, the business owners. All right, about 650, they're going to reach enough iron technology to put together iron weapons. And as we've talked about in the past, right when a society gets iron technology for weapons, soon afterwards we're going to see some fighting. One of the best ways they employed the use of this iron weapon technology was in the phalanx. Okay, the phalanx, you see the word here, it actually comes from the word tortoise. We'll talk about why that is in a moment. This is an example I have for you down here. This is a phalanx. This is a 256-man phalanx. And if you notice, the first 5 rows, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, all have their spears pointed directly forward. This was an unbelievably powerful unit. Alexander the Great's going to use this and just tear people apart. It's going to be the Persians' worst enemy. And here's why. To get to this first row of men right here, in order to even be able to actually go after them, you've got to get past 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 rows of spear heads. To get past those 5 rows, even to attack these guys. You say, okay, well then, when the first row falls, this guy, this row right here, is ready to tip their spears and take. So this unit loses almost no effectiveness until you actually kill the 5th last row. They're going to be just as powerful to a unit coming in. And you say, well, okay, well then we'll just back up and throw stuff at them. Well, that's where the term phalanx comes in terms of coming from tortoise. And if you've seen the movie 300, they do a fairly good job of depicting this. The men would stand together, lock their shields, and they would actually form a complete shell that would really protect them from arrows or stones or whatever it is that's going to be hurled and thrown at them, which means that you did have to really engage them in terms of melee and to get right up on top of them. Alright, we talk about Sparta. Sparta is going to be not exactly as it's depicted in the movie. For those of you who saw the movie, that's great. But again, keep in mind that's based on a graphic novel. That's not really based on true history. Some of it is, but a lot of it's left out. As I'd mentioned in the previous lecture, the Spartans did come from the Dorians, who had invaded and sort of put the Mycenaeans off the map. They're going to live out on the Peloponnesus. Okay, Sparta's going to be located right here. Okay, on this, remember, it's connected by an isthmus to the Attica region. Okay, down here, so that's where they're going to be located. They're going to have a lot of state-owned slaves. Those state-owned slaves are going to be helots, and those helots are going to be doing a lot of the agricultural responsibilities because they're going to spend most of their time fighting. Their system of government actually has a pair of kings and a council of elders, as well as ephors that are going to help guide and direct the city. In terms of training, it is true that unhealthy children were abandoned. You saw them in the movie, not necessarily thrown down into a ditch, but they were often abandoned. At 7, for young boys, military training would begin. At 20, they were allowed to marry. 30, they could actually leave the barracks and live at home, but they actually couldn't eat at home until they were 60. So there was a very, very strong, very strong sense of military importance. All right, women were expected to exercise, but typically that was to help them produce strong children, and they could own property and run their own estates, and this was often because the men were away at war, or should they die in battle, the women would not be left without recourse. Sparta did isolate themselves. They really didn't see a whole lot of value in wealth and trade. They had little use for the arts. One of the this is a quote from one of the contemporary Athenians of the day: Spartans are willing to die for their city because they have no reason to live. Spartans effectively fight to fight. That's what they're fighting to protect, is their fighting tradition, whereas the Athenians believe themselves to be fighting for the purposes of democracy and arts and well-rounded personality and all these types of things. So there's that clash, certainly that culture clash. When we talk about Athens, they're located in a different region. They're located, they're not on the Peloponnese. They're actually in the region known as Attica, and they're going to transition from a monarchy to an aristocracy. But early in their formation, the nobles really were in charge of most things, and this really bothered a lot of the soldiers and the merchants, which is eventually going to lead to enough trouble that a democracy will be imposed. All right, Solon is going to institute a number of important changes. One of those is outlawing debt slavery. Debt slavery is basically, you owe me money. Instead of paying me, I allow you to become my slave, but I set how much you make, so you'll never effectively pay me off. When it comes to later reforms, Pisistratus is going to do a good job in terms of weakening the stranglehold the aristocracy has on the poor, and Cleisthenes is going to institute one of the first official legislatures that we're going to see with the Council of 500. When it comes to Athenian women, they did have a very limited share in public life, and many of the leading philosophers of the day actually thought women were imperfect because they lacked rational reasoning. They were expected to do your typical, and we've seen these before, all the way back to Egypt: spinning, weaving, childcare, and preparing the food for the home. When it came to education in Athens, basically if you had money and you were male, you could be educated. You received a well-rounded education that included reading, writing, music, and poetry, as well as rhetoric or public speaking. You received some military training in athletics, but it was a much more balanced program than the Spartans pursued. The things they had tying them together were really their religious beliefs. We're not going to go into all the different gods, but their religious beliefs certainly tied them together. They had a common language, and they shared this polytheistic pantheon, which in turn they shared temples and festivals and important oracle sites, which really did kind of bring them together. They also collectively looked down on non-Greeks. They referred to them as barbaroi. That's where we get the term barbarian. And this is important that they would be unified, because when they go to war with Persia, without each other, they would have certainly fallen. So that's going to wrap up our little section on introducing the rise of the city-states, and we're going to move on with some of the more detailed information about some of the wars and conflict in the next section.